They didn't just take my firewood. They took my granddaughter's warmth. They took the vow I made to my late wife on the night she slipped away, that I would never again let the cold claim one of ours. The Homeowners Association called my woodpile an eyesore, a violation of community standards. So one morning while I was at work, they sent a crew with a flatbed truck, loaded every last stick I'd split with my own hands, and drove off like it was nothing. Then the deep freeze hit Montana like a hammer. Gas prices soared, the power grid buckled, and little Grace came down with a fever that scared me more than anything since losing Evelyn. While the rest of us huddled in the dark, the association clubhouse glowed bright and warm every night because they were burning my wood. What they didn't know was that I had cameras running, neighbors watching, and a stubborn streak older than the hills around us. This isn't just a story about stolen logs. It's about a neighborhood that finally woke up and said enough is enough, and about the day the HOA learned that some fires burn a lot hotter than pine. There's a quiet in the high country that only a man who's buried his heart in it truly knows. A stillness between the wind in the lodgepole pines and the snap of a branch under snow, where even the ravens hold their breath. That summer I lived inside that stillness, swinging an axe from dawn until the light bled out behind the ridge, stacking cord after cord as if each log could hold back the memory of the winter that took Evelyn. She'd gone in January 3 years earlier, pneumonia complicated by a 3-day blackout during the worst ice storm Evergreen, Montana, had seen in 50 years. In the frozen hospital hallway, as her fingers cooled in mine, I promised our 8-year-old granddaughter Grace, whom we'd been raising since our daughter's accident, that the cold would never win again. Not in our house. Not while I had breath left. We live on the upper benches outside Evergreen, a small mountain town where the wind cuts straight to the bone and heating bills can break a retiree faster than illness ever could. Our cedar-sided ranch house sits on the outer loop of Ridgeview Meadows, a tidy subdivision of white fences, identical mailboxes, and lawns kept like putting greens. The Homeowners Association runs it with rules about shutter colors, basketball hoops, and how tall your grass can grow. Before Evelyn passed, I paid the dues and kept to myself. Grief sharpens your vision, though. Suddenly, I saw the petty control hiding behind all that perfection. That summer, I poured every spare hour into getting ready. Grace spent mornings at day camp while I puttered with the park's crew for seasonal pay. Evenings belonged to the axe and the woodpile. I split lodgepole pine, spruce, and a little cherry a neighbor gave me when he moved. Each piece was cut to length, dried under cover, and stacked neat along the side of the house in a lean-to I'd framed myself. It wasn't pretty, but it was safe, off the siding, and entirely on my own lot. Grace would wander out at dusk, handing me wedges or cheering when the mall split a tough round clean. One August evening, with the ridge glowing orange, she looked up at me with absolute trust and asked, "It's going to be warm this winter, right, Grandpa?" I knelt, wiped sawdust from her cheek, and said, "We're ready this time, sweetheart. I promise." By September, the stack was chest-high and 20 feet long. I'd added a pellet stove as backup. The old propane furnace rattled like it resented working. After the blackout that cost me Evelyn, I wasn't trusting the grid again. Grace brought home a crayon drawing one afternoon. Our house with curly smoke from the chimney, an enormous woodpile beside it, and in purple letters across the bottom, our safe castle. I taped it to the refrigerator where it stayed like a quiet prayer. But even as frost silvered the rails and the days shortened, I felt eyes on me. Not paranoia, just the instinct of a man who's lost too much and learned to read trouble in the wind. It started innocently enough. A couple walking their labradoodle lingered across the street, snapping photos of my woodpile. Next day, a stiff notice appeared in my mailbox. Violation, unauthorized exterior storage, and visual nuisance. Daily fine, $150 until corrected. No signature, just the Ridgeview Meadows HOA stamp. I laughed once, short and bitter, then wrote across the bottom in red marker, "Personal firewood storage expressly permitted under Montana Code annotated 70-17-101. Happy to discuss with the sheriff." I taped it to my front window facing the street. More notices followed. Certified letters calling the stack a fire hazard, disruptive to community harmony, requiring prior approval. I answered each one politely, attaching copies of state law, photos showing the pile was covered, dry, and safe. I asked for a formal hearing. Silence. Then one gray morning, a white SUV idled across the street for 10 minutes. Driver in sunglasses despite the clouds. That night, I moved a few armloads into the garage, just in case. A week later, the final notice came, pinned to my door like a wanted poster, with grainy photos and an ultimatum: remove immediately or face enforcement. I drafted another measured response, dropped it at the community center, and waited. 3 days after that, the fine started, $150 a day. That night, I emailed the entire board and the management company, copying the county code office, requesting a hearing. The reply came from Harold Bennett, the association attorney. Cease hostile communication or risk loss of privileges. Hostile. I'd used respectfully 5 times. I looked out at the neat rows of wood waiting to keep Grace warm and felt the first real fear, not for me, but for what people drunk on small power will do when challenged. It was a raw Thursday in early November when they came. I'd just seen Grace off to school, purple coat zipped high, backpack bouncing, and was standing on the porch with coffee when the flatbed turned into my drive. 2 men in work vests climbed out. One carried a clipboard, the other went straight for the lean-to. I set my mug down hard. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Clipboard man smiled without warmth. "Mr. Harper, we're here to abate the violation after due notice. You're trespassing. Get off my property." He showed me photocopies. No court order, no sheriff. The covenants allow enforcement after repeated noncompliance. I stepped between them and my wood. Touch one log, and I'm calling the sheriff. The worker paused. Clipboard man made a call. Minutes later, Margaret Ellison, the board president herself, stepped out of a black Suburban in a camel coat and tight smile. If control had a face, it wore her expression. "Mr. Harper," she said, "you've had ample opportunity. The board voted unanimously. We're simply resolving the matter. By stealing the fuel I split to keep my granddaughter from getting sick again." She glanced at the stack. "Standards must be maintained." I pulled out my phone and started recording. "I'm documenting theft in progress." They ignored me. Logs thudded onto the trailer, my logs, split with sweat and memory. The sheriff's dispatcher said it was civil, no immediate intervention. By the time I hung up, 2 cords were loaded and strapped. Margaret lingered. "This isn't personal." "No," I said quietly. "It's cowardice." She left without another word. The driveway fell silent except for wind rattling the empty tarp frames. The ground bore boot prints and drag marks like scars. I sat inside, house already colder, and watched the video again and again. Then I started planning. That night, Grace shivered under every blanket we had. The pellet stove glowed thin and mechanical. I stayed up until dawn compiling documents, deed, covenants, statutes, video stills, and sent a long letter to the county attorney, the state housing board, and the editor of the Evergreen Gazette. I ended it plainly. You didn't just take firewood. You took a child's reliable heat in a Montana winter. By morning, Harold Bennett replied with polished threats of defamation. I printed everything and drove to City Hall. The clerk whispered, "You're not the first. Ellison's been on a rampage since she took over." Outside, a tall man in a faded Marine jacket stopped me. "You the Firewood fellow?" "Jack Harper." "Bill Donovan, retired Corps. They fined me last year for a flagpole they said was too tall. Couple of us meet Sunday evenings at the VFW. You should come." It didn't feel like rebellion yet, but it felt like the beginning of something. Winter bit hard and early. Temperatures dropped into the teens overnight. Grace's cheeks lost their color. Her hands stayed cold. She caught a cough that turned into fever. Memories of Evelyn flooded back. I burned scrap lumber, old shelves, anything that would catch. Hardware stores were sold out of everything. A kind clerk slipped me a sack of ends when I mentioned Grace. One night her fever spiked. I sat beside her bed until it broke at 3 a.m. Then the anger settled in. Quiet, steady, absolute. The next morning I started calling neighbors I barely knew, the ones with their own stories of fines and threats. By Sunday, 32 people crowded into Janet Murray's garage, steam rising from coffee cups. Stories spilled out: bird feeders, door colors, muddy trucks, flags. When I played the seizure video on a bedsheet screen, the room went still. A quiet man named Gordon said his nephew maintained the clubhouse and had mentioned a sudden huge supply of split wood right after my pile disappeared. Fury rippled through the garage like heat. We agreed to gather every document, every photo, every bill, and build a case no one could ignore. Days later, Bill texted, "Check the clubhouse camera." I'd forgotten the little motion unit we'd mounted in his truck bed. Clear footage showed workers wheeling my unmistakable logs inside after dark, smoke soon curling thick from the chimney while the neighborhood shivered. I forwarded the clip to our group. Replies poured in: shock, outrage, resolve. Sarah Ruiz, a contract lawyer new to the neighborhood, wrote, "This is conversion of property. Criminal. I'm in." The Evergreen Gazette ran the story front page. HOA seizes retirees' firewood, allegedly burns it in clubhouse while residents freeze. Shares exploded online. Margaret called an emergency meeting and claimed the wood was unclaimed property repurposed pending disposal. Nobody bought it. Then the Arctic front hit, 40 below with wind chill, rolling blackouts, pipes bursting. The association emailed urging thermostats at 60 to prevent grid failure. Yet the clubhouse glowed every night, my smoke rising proud while children slept in hats and coats. Sarah and I filed complaints: trespass, conversion, reckless endangerment of a minor. A maintenance whistleblower handed over invoices and a note in Margaret's handwriting: use the Harper seizure until further notice. The second Gazette piece ran with photos of board members toasting by my fire. Outrage went statewide. Someone shoveled huge letters in the snow opposite the clubhouse: return what you stole. In early February, the association scheduled a clarification session at the high school gym. Over 200 residents packed the bleachers. Margaret arrived late, looking worn. Her scripted remarks didn't last long. Bill moved for immediate recall. Sarah cited the bylaws allowing it for breach of duty. Ballots were passed out, crayons used when pens ran dry. Final count: 178 to remove, 8 abstentions, none to retain. The gym exhaled as one. Margaret stood frozen. No cheers, just the quiet weight of years of resentment finally lifted. Criminal citations followed. Margaret was served at her door. Mediation ended with full restitution, a public apology, and her permanent resignation from any leadership role. At the next community meeting, she stood alone at the microphone and said, voice shaking, "I abused the trust placed in me. I put appearance above humanity and endangered a child. I am profoundly sorry." She looked straight at Grace and me. The room stayed silent, but the truth had finally been spoken. Spring thawed slowly. Neighbors left bundles of firewood on my porch again, clean splits and pickups. Bill was elected president on a platform of open books and no fines without neighbor vote. One of the first new rules: explicit protection for safe firewood storage. Grace and I planted a garden where the old pile had stood: marigolds, peas, and in the back corner a small spruce Bill dug from his land. "What should we name it?" I asked. She thought, then smiled. "Evelyn." One warm April evening, Grace looked up from the driveway and asked, "Grandpa, could it happen again?" "Maybe," I said honestly. "But now we know what to do. We speak up, we stand together, and we keep our own fire burning." She grinned, fearless. "Then we'll always be ready." That night we built a fire just for joy. The house filled with the honest smell of pine and safety. Grace fell asleep on the couch, sketchbook open to a new drawing. Our house, tall smoke, blooming garden, the little spruce marked with a careful E in purple crayon at the bottom. Our castle is strong now. I carried her to bed, stood at the window watching stars over the ridge, and knew we had reclaimed far more than firewood. We had reclaimed our winter. We had reclaimed our peace. And no one would ever take that from us again. What did you think of the story? I'd love to hear your take in the comments, especially on the bigger questions it raises. Have you ever faced petty tyranny from an HOA, a boss, or local rules that seem to forget real people live behind the regulations? Where do you draw the line between community standards and individual rights? And when injustice shows up at your door, do you believe quiet persistence and neighbors standing together can still win the day? Or does it sometimes take louder measures? Share your own experiences and your stand. I read every comment.